A whole new world. The Agrabah no one sees. When they were what he thought was a safe distance from the market, Aladdin finally collapsed against a broken water trough. "Oh, wow, did you see his face?" he said, cracking up. Boy, was he mad. He must feel so stupid now. He bought everything until he completely ruined it, Abu seemed to sense he was being criticized. He jumped off Aladdin's shoulder and chattered sulkily. The girl was bent over, hand to her side, panting. After her breaths had slowed to mere wheezes, she pressed the palms of her hands together and closed her eyes. Then she did a series of stretches that were graceful and seemed well practiced. "Sorry," Aladdin said. "Guess you're not used to running much, huh?" "Yes, you should be completely sorry for saving me from having my hand cut off. And no, I'm not used to running from people. I do race with Raja, my—" She paused as if thinking of an appropriate word. "Dog." She was being purposefully vague. Not that it took a genius to figure out that she had probably spent her whole life in a woman's quarters of some mansion or estate. "Where are we, anyway?" she asked, changing the subject and looking around. They were resting in a wide intersection between three broken-down buildings with no particular purpose. There was no one in sight, and the desert breeze blew mournfully through the few dry grasses and weeds that grew in the edges of the hand-picked roads. The only other noise was from a fight somewhere nearby, shouting punctuated by terrible, wet-sounding blows. Aladdin suddenly realized that this must be like for the girl, alone with a stranger in the middle of nowhere, no idea how to get back to wherever she was from. If he had been the wrong sort of person, the more dangerous kind of straight rat, that was exactly the kind of place he would have taken her before divesting her of all her valuables. A place no one would hear her scream. "Well, I could tell you it, but it probably won't mean much," he said, trying to sound friendly. He stood up and whirled his hands as he talked, a perfect tour guide. "We have officially entered the quaint residential section of the poorest part of Agrabah. A lot of these streets don't even have names. We just call them the Eastern Way to Hakim's or the Stinky Alley near the Rat Catcher. The closest major landmark is the old Ottoman mosque over there. Hasn't been used in centuries, except by pigeons and the homeless when sandstorms come off in the desert." The girl was frowning. Not angrily, more like she was desperately trying to understand something. Something Aladdin was saying, so very simply, was eluding her. Where did I lose you?" Aladdin asked. "Was it pigeon, or sandstorm, or stinky?" "Actually, it was homeless," the girl said slowly. "People live in the old mosque?" "Not all the time. It's a little creepy. Some say it's haunted. Hey, speaking of homes, is there some place I can take you?" It was the right thing to do, of course. Save the pretty girl, take the pretty girl home, refuse the reward. All right, maybe take the reward if there was a reward. Wasn't there usually a reward? Probably in reality they would take one look at him, grab the girl, and order him off the point of the pointy skimter. He hoped she lived really far away so it would take a long time to get her home. Like in an oasis, out in the desert. That would be perfect. He was pleasantly surprised when she shook her head. "Show me your home. I want to see where you live." Aladdin found himself blushing, a very unusual condition for him. He tossed his black hair so she couldn't see. "Oh, you don't want to see that. It's nothing special." It was, in fact, really nothing at all, if by home one generally meant four walls, a roof, and some sort of door. "Come on," the girl begged, having recovered her breath and her enthusiasm. "I threw myself down in camel dung while playing along with you. Do you think I care what your house looks like?" Aladdin realized he was grinning. "All right, but remember, you asked for it." He took a quick look around, evaluating the best route. Then he led her around on the back in one of the ancient crumbling houses and began to scurry up a rickety old ladder. She asked skeptically, rinsing with each rung she stepped on as if she feared the whole thing would break. "What are we doing?" Aladdin hopped onto a balcony and offered his hand. She pretended it wasn't there, nimbly leaping once she saw what she was to do. "Remember the bit about poor and stinky? I'm not stinky, but I don't live in exactly the safest part of Agrabah. I figure it's better to get off the streets where we might be seen." "What's wrong with being seen?" she asked. "I don't know. What's wrong with not paying for a piece of fruit and then giving it away?" I don't know. Her voice trailed off. That you have to pay for things? Aladdin finished, smiling gently. All right, it was my first time in the market, she admitted. I've never actually bought anything before. I never thought about how it all worked out. Prices and money and things. You caught me. He couldn't help looking smug. He had been so right when he'd pegged her for a rich girl in disguise. But the girl narrowed her eyes and gave him a sort of look he usually expected from the widow Golbar. I don't see a purse of gold coins on you, smart guy. How do you pay for things? Aladdin found himself, quite possibly for the first time ever, speechless. That's clever of you, he finally said. But that's totally different. I only steal because otherwise I'd starve. So it's all right for you to steal, because you need food, but it's not all right for me, who didn't know any better and was just trying to help a little child? Aladdin crossed his arms. All right, yes, you're totally and completely clever. Let's just say the reason you're going up here on the roofs is because apparently you don't know what stealing is, and I do, and I'm used to that sort of life. Look here. He crouched down on the balcony and pulled her next to him. In the shadow of a crooked tower, a small group of children and a couple of teenagers sprawled distortedly. They wore rags and had shadows under their eyes. Two of the youngest tried to play a game with a pebble, tossing it back and forth. The older kids were dusting their arms with ashes, making themselves look sicker than they were. The moment anyone, and I mean anyone, except for other street rats, come through here, these guys will leap up and surround you, and begging. And if he or she doesn't give them something, a crust of bread, a coin, or sometimes even if he does, while one child is crying about her hunger, another will be picking the person's pocket. The girl looked horrified. They're all just pretending to be poor? Aladdin chuckled wryly. No, they're not pretending. They're not pretending to be poor or shoeless or homeless or starving. All of that is very, very real, but sometimes it takes costumes and makeup and play acting for people to see the truth that is right under their noses. She watched the children, and he watched her face as she tried to process everything she had just learned. She was innocent, that was true, but there was intelligence in those large eyes. She picked up things very, very quickly. It was more than Aladdin could usually say about those who weren't street rats. What a waste for some father to trap such a smart, interesting girl behind a garden gate, like a prized animal. Where are your parents? She asked. Dead, or sick, or trying to find work or food. Why can't they? Aladdin watched as she tried to find words for ideas she had never experienced before. Why isn't anything being done about this? She finally asked, anger in her voice. Oh, come on, who cares about us street rats? Aladdin asked, a little more sadly than he meant to. The Sultan stays locked up in his palace, playing with his golden toys all day. He only comes out to observe an eclipse or fly his kites. Who knows if he's even aware that half his city is starving? The girl's eyes narrowed at his mention of the Sultan. He couldn't tell if she was angry at the Sultan as well, or... Well, technically, it was worth your head to say anything bad about the Sultan or his household. That never stopped anyone at the quarter of the street rats. There might not have been meat, bread, or water, but there was an endless supply of insults. He thought she was about to say something, but the girl pressed her lips together with thoughtful finality. Come on, Aladdin said, jumping up and giving her his hand, trying to lighten the mood. It's not all that bad. We've got complete freedom of the streets, and trust me, if you grew up here, you'd never have to worry about walking by yourself anywhere. People would be afraid of you. This time she accepted his hand, maybe because her thoughts were elsewhere. Her skin was soft and her nails short but perfect. Aladdin gave her hand a little squeeze before regretfully letting go and helping her up the next ladder. You said we, she said slowly. So you consider yourself one of those street rats? Everyone else does, he said a little darkly. But, yeah, I mean, I'm poor, I grew up here, they were my friends and family, but I'm not really part of them, not anymore. Like I said, I just steal to eat. When they can, they steal for profit. I want something better out of my life. That is their life. Not that they have a choice, he added quickly. It's not like anyone is handing out bread or work. It sounds very complicated, the girl said. It didn't sound like a platitude. I didn't think it was, Aladdin said, pausing to reflect. I'm just me. Part-time thief and bane of the fruit market. I think maybe there's more to you than meets the eye. She had a tiny wicked smile on her face and had obviously been watching the way he climbed. A strange warmth rushed through him. It was like he couldn't decide whether to blush or show off. He chose neither, turning around to quickly throw himself up and over the edge of the roof. When he reached down, he helped her up. She tripped over her robe as she came over the side, a strange thing from a girl who seemed to otherwise so utterly be graceful. Aladdin caught her before she hit the ground, or, in this case, the roof. She fell into him, pressing her torso against his as she grabbed around his shoulders for support. The heat of her skin burned through her robes, and he felt the softness of her body. She smelled better than anything in the quarter of the street rats, better than anything Aladdin could remember ever being smelled. Better even than the tiny vial of rose attar he had once stolen for his mother, which she'd made him return. When she stood up, she didn't stand away from him. Instead, she kept close and looked up into his face, apparently just as entranced as he was. Aladdin felt like falling to the ground himself. The girl said. He made himself focus on how they would get to the next rooftop. The poles that were usually up there to support clay urns drying in the sun were right where he had left them. Of course, he busied himself with reaching for one. I never thanked you for saving me from that man, the girl finished, weakly, managing not to sound too flustered. Oh, forget it, Aladdin said, meaning it. You look like someone who needed help as soon as you entered the market. With the skill of someone who had long lived on his toes, Aladdin ran to the edge of the building, and a pole vaulted to the next one. Was I that obvious? The girl asked ironically. Aladdin grinned. There was something wonderful about a girl who didn't take herself too seriously. You do sort of stand out, he admitted. She brightened at his unintentional compliment, eyes glowing prettily. I mean, you don't seem to understand how dangerous Agrabah can be, Aladdin corrected himself, running a hand through his hair self-consciously. He looked around for a plank he could lay down between the roof and her to walk across. But before he could think of some way of changing the subject or staying on this one, the girl had found a pole on her own and leapt nimbly across to him, far, far more gracefully than he had. Her robe swirled around her as he landed like a queen of the Jinn alighting on the golden sands of the desert. I learned pretty quickly, she said with mock hotness. Aladdin was once again speechless. What sort of rich girl was this? One who could leap like a mountain goat and play crazy at a moment's notice, who had never seen poverty before and now, confronted with it, thought about it rather quickly rather than making rash statements, who didn't care that Aladdin was a thief except when he applied different standards to her. He was a loner, not a hermit. He had known other girls, Morgiana, the Shadow, Abedanu, the tailor's daughter, Nefret with the strange green eyes, who came from the desert when the moon was new to trade trinkets from faraway lands. None of them was like this girl. Come on, he said, holding out his hand. She took it, as he somehow knew she would. It's this way. The girl grinned in delight as he took her over the boards, brittle with dry rot and loose stones worn down to the middle by countless feet centuries earlier. They entered a tower through a keyhole-shaped window that must have had bright mosaics around it at one time. Everything shiny or worth anything at all had been salvaged decades before. Not even rats lived in this high, desolate place anymore. Well, 2 did. 2 street rats, if one counted Abu.